Hey Redeemer, I hope that you enjoyed celebrating Easter with us this past weekend. One story that I wanted to pass along that was encouraging to me was from two of our members, Rob and Sarah Petrie. They were out on their balcony Sunday morning. I happened to see another neighbor out on his balcony. Their neighbor asked, "What are your plans for the day?" They shared that while our church is not able to gather physically, we're worshiping together online, and Easter is going to be at easterforarlington.com. They saw him again later that night, and he said, "Hey, our family watched your Easter service. We really enjoyed it, and we've been looking for a community to get connected to." So that kicked off a great conversation between them about the kind of community that Rob and Sarah have found at Redeemer. So I share that just to hopefully encourage you that in this uncharted territory that we all find ourselves in, the Lord is still using us. We might not know exactly what it's going to look like to love our neighbors, serve our neighbors, share our hope in Jesus during this time, but God just asks for our willingness. We don't have to have all the answers. We just have to make ourselves available, and He will use us to continue the mission of His church even during this time. So I hope that you're encouraged by that. And tonight, let's turn our attention to John chapter 20. Eric is going to be continuing our series through the Upper Room Discourse this weekend, but tonight we're in John 20. So John 20, this chapter begins with the resurrection. And then after Jesus is raised from the dead, the first person he appears to is Mary Magdalene, and then he appears to the rest of his disciples. But John 20:24 tells us, "Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came." For whatever reason, Thomas was not with the other disciples when Jesus appeared to them. And because of that, we end up with this scene here. And because of that, Thomas gets the nickname that has stuck with him throughout all of church history. Do you know what it is? Doubting Thomas. I don't know about you guys, but I think that's kind of a raw deal for Thomas to be so defined by this one scene for the rest of church history. But I hope what you'll see tonight is that this passage is not here as something that Thomas should be embarrassed about. It's not something that stands here as a condemnation of Thomas, and it's not reason for us to feel embarrassed or condemned when we have our own experiences of doubt. Now, this passage shows us God's heart and God's love, God's response to the doubter that's inside each one of us, you and me. So let's dive into the passage. John 20, starting in verse 25, since I just read verse 24 for you. So the other disciples told Thomas, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." So Thomas comes back after these disciples have had this incredible experience with the risen Christ, and they can't wait to tell Thomas about it. And what is his response? No, I can't believe that. It is a response of doubt. Now, when we talk about doubt, I really consider doubts to have two different kind of elements. There's a kind of doubt that is a sort of head doubt, a sort of academic, scientific doubt. Hey, I need that verified. That sounds unlikely. That sounds impossible. Some of us continue to have these doubts about the claims of Christianity. How is it that there can be a man who rose from the dead? How is it that there is a God? I need that verified. I need proof of that. So there's a sort of academic doubt to Thomas's claim here. He says, if I'm going to believe that, I need to see it. But there's another aspect to doubt. And really, in my experience, it's very seldom that these two elements are entirely separate from one another. Usually head doubt also has some sort of connection to a heart doubt, a feeling, an emotion, a passion that makes it hard to believe, not because of academic reasons, but more for personal, emotional reasons. Sometimes this can take the form of someone saying, honestly, I don't want this to be true. I don't want the claims of Christianity to be true because of the implications that would have for how I live my life. Another form that it can take, though, is a doubt that comes from just feeling like God has let you down, feeling like God has disappointed you, feeling like God has not been or done for you everything that you wanted him to be and to do. Maybe you're feeling some of that right now in the midst of this pandemic. God, I thought you were good. God, I thought you were in control. How could you let this happen? We had been planning this wedding for over a year, and now this. God, this is my only chance to celebrate my high school graduation. God, don't you see what this is doing to our family, to our marriage, to our loved ones, to our world? God, what are you doing? I thought you were good. It's a kind of doubt that comes from pain, that comes from suffering, that comes from disappointment and confusion. And I believe that Thomas's expression of doubt here is so intense because it's not just an academic, I would need to see that. No, it's a personal suffering that is fueling this doubt. Think about it. Thomas who has walked with Jesus for years, Thomas who has followed Jesus, Thomas who has had his entire life transformed by Jesus's teaching, by Jesus's example, by Jesus's love. And then this man who he had followed, he saw him wrongfully arrested, beaten, mocked, murdered. He saw the man who he had put his hope and his trust in crushed and killed. And then he shows up back to the upper room and hears everyone else who is in awe, who is smiling, who is rejoicing and saying, Thomas, Jesus is alive. And Thomas says, no. I saw him killed. I ran when they came for him. And I know that his heart stopped beating and they laid him in a tomb. And now you're telling me that he's alive? That you saw him? No. No, I can't believe that. I can't risk believing that. Thomas is sitting in what feels like the wreckage of his life. And they come to him and say, Jesus is alive. And he says, that is not something that I'm ready to believe. Verse 26, an entire week goes by. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, what is Jesus going to say? Is he going to rebuke him? Is he going to say, hey, get out of here, ye of little faith, not believing in me? How dare you? No, here's what he says. He said to Thomas, put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. Here is Jesus' response to the doubter. Here's what we see. 1, Jesus heard and acknowledges Thomas's doubt. He says exactly to Thomas what Thomas had said he would need to see, he would need to verify. He says, if you need to put your hand in the wound on my hand, do it. If you need to put your hand inside the wound in my side where the spear pierced me through, do it, Thomas. Don't disbelieve, believe. This is Jesus' heart for the doubter. He wants them to believe. Here's what Thomas says in response. Verse 28, Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. You'll notice the text actually doesn't tell us whether or not Thomas actually stepped forward and placed his hand into Jesus' wounds. But whether he did or not, here is the confession of Thomas, my Lord and my God. It is not just Jesus is alive, my teacher is alive. It is Jesus is Lord, Jesus is God. Even more than that, it's intensely personal, my Lord and my God. In his doubt, Thomas said, I can't believe it. In his love, Jesus said, I'm here. I'm here, Thomas. See my wounds. I suffered for you. I entered into suffering for you. I know what it's like to suffer. See me risen. I suffered, but I triumphed. I am victorious over sin and death. And see me here with you. I haven't let you down. I haven't abandoned you. And you know what? I'm not afraid of your doubt. I'm not afraid of your disappointment. I can take it. Voice it to me. Share it with me. Because I'm here with you and I'm not leaving. I love you. And I want you to believe. And Jesus' response of love transforms Thomas the cynic. It fills him with a faith to the point where this profession of my Lord and my God, this is one of the highest, truest, most exemplary professions of faith in Jesus that we have in the New Testament. And it comes from the lips of a doubter. Jesus goes on to say in verse 29, Jesus says to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Now, there's a way of reading this where you might take that as a rebuke to Thomas, as Jesus shaking his head and being like, man, your faith is worth way less than the faith of those who are one day going to believe without seeing me. But that's not really the way that we should interpret it. This is not a depreciation of Thomas's faith. For one thing, the other disciples, they also had seen Jesus risen. So he's on the same level as them, needing to see the risen Jesus before they believe. For another thing, Thomas is an apostle. And it's very important that the apostles are witnesses of the risen Christ because it is their testimony which is the foundation of the church. Ephesians 2:20 says that God is building each of us as members of his church, his house, which rests upon the foundation of the prophets and the apostles, with Christ being the cornerstone. So the fact that Thomas needed to see Jesus before he believed is not a depreciation of his faith. It is simply a statement of fact. And what's happening here is not Jesus shaming Thomas, but Jesus taking the example of Thomas and then turning and looking forward to you and me, to those who will believe without seeing him in the flesh. This point becomes clearer as we continue, as the author of this gospel continues to write in verse 30, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." The story of doubting Thomas is not here to shame the doubters. The story of doubting Thomas is here to hammer home the thesis of this gospel, that Jesus is Lord and God, that Jesus is our Lord and our God, to invite us to believe in him. That we can see his response to our doubt, that we can see him coming to us in love, saying, "Redeemer, I know it's hard right now. I know you're suffering, but see my wounds. I know what it's like to suffer. See me risen. I am victorious and nothing is out of my control. And see me with you. I'm here with you." Church, I pray that we would see Jesus. I pray that we would not be afraid to voice our doubts, our hurts, our confusion. He can take it. And I pray that doubters like you and me would receive the grace that God offers freely, the hope that we have in him, the love that he pours out in our hearts, his presence with us. He invites us. Do not disbelieve, but believe.